The sea had not even had time to wake when a resounding crash tore apart the peaceful atmosphere of Beaufort Harbor. The hull plank split in two before the stunned eyes of a silver-haired old man, his hand still shaking as it gripped the worn helm. Around him, a group of young men laughed scornfully, raising cameras that cast cold LED beams onto the cracked wooden body of the last horizon. Someone whistled as a patch of paint peeled away. They shouted, "A record view count is coming!" In that moment, Daniel Foster, the veteran who once guided this very vessel through a rain of bullets to save lives, felt the shell of his heart crack dry like rusted blades. But the story did not end with a mere insult, for in just 1 hour, the small harbor would witness something never before seen on any live stream. 8 U.S. Navy warships, sounding their horns, arranged in formation to honor the boat that had been mocked as a pile of splintered wood. What lay hidden beneath that aged timber, commanding the world's fiercest military force to bow? Stay until the final moment, then hit subscribe on the Veteran Best Stories channel so you won't miss the memories that can lift our future. Daniel was born in the autumn of 1947, when the maple ridges blazed red at the foot of the Appalachians. The distant whistle of a train slipped through the rotting wooden frame, blending with the rhythm of rain on the mountain slopes into a fractured symphony between the longing to set off and the warmth of the family hearth. The small wooden house, roofed with pine planks, seemed to tremble in time with the steel wheels clattering on the rails, instilling in the brown-haired boy a restless urge to step beyond the misty valley. Just 18, Daniel donned his first white uniform, his chest filled with the scent of sea salt despite never having seen the ocean. The diesel engine of the military bus carrying new recruits roared down the hill, carrying Appalachia and his childhood behind it, leaving only the scent of damp leaves and the chirping of crickets. The sea did not greet him gently. The Pacific currents flung Daniel from sunny Guam to the smoky haze of Subic Bay, then shoved him into the oil-streaked waves of the Gulf of Tonkin. For more than 10 years, he lived to the shriek of alarms tearing through the night, slept hurriedly under the red glow of the engine room lights, awoke to the acrid tang of paint and engine oil. Hands that once held a pencil to sketch maple forests grew calloused from wrenches, levels, and searing hot steel. At every port of call, he jotted a single line in his small logbook, the date, the coordinates, and the feeling beneath his feet, as if afraid to forget he had ever been there. Yet the deepest feeling always came when the ship pulled away, the flinging of the anchor chain into the water, the long, shattering blast of the horn, and the foam churning white under the vast steel hull, a sorrow hard to name, both proud and utterly alone. When his discharge papers were signed, Daniel did not return straight home. Instead, he stopped in Beaufort, South Carolina. The federal bus dropped him at an intersection still scented with salt, where the warm, sonorous church bells soothed his chest after a long, uncertain journey. Beaufort was little more than a marsh town redolent of sea oats and brown algae, yet Daniel heard here the ocean's pulse beneath the riverbed, like the stirring within his own heart he once felt beneath the steel shell of a warship. With meager benefits, he bought the Last Horizon, a 32-foot mahogany rescue boat, its hull flecked with salt scars. Its old Cummins engine still growled defiantly like a stubborn heartbeat. For weeks on end, the veteran stood alone under the marsh sun, scraping away each layer of barnacles, repainting the deck in that familiar navy blue, hands smeared with sweat and brine, till his strokes blurred into the salt-laden sea breeze. Beneath the bow, Daniel carved a small compartment, fashioned a sea museum from reclaimed pine planks. On the low wall hung a Pacific chart coated in amber varnish, its winding red ink tracing his old voyages. On the floor lay a warped helicopter rotor blade scavenged from Subik's scrapyard. Beside it, a scorched destroyer plate labeled USS Benson, 1970. Everything was arranged in quiet reverence, not mere mementos, but proof that blood and steel had merged with the sea so they might have today. Every Sunday morning, Last Horizon slipped away from the dock while dew still clung to the water's surface. On deck, the poor children of Beaufort, hair sun-bleached, eyes shining bright, gathered around the veteran. Daniel recounted midway in a deep, resonant voice. He described the fighter's loop as if it tore the heavens, roaring around the wooden mast, then lingered on the moment the American flag was planted atop Suribachi, so the children could hear the cheers bursting from their own chests. When the story ended, they raced to fold paper boats, setting them adrift on the bay's waves, shouting make-believe signals. At those times, Daniel sat leisurely behind the wheel, letting the wind draw salt through his silver hair. In his heart, he heard distant church bells mingling with the whistle of an Appalachian train. However, the harbor was not only filled with children. Their parents, hands weighed down by bills and scholarship dreams, watched their offspring enthralled by rusted steel fragments and a 70-year-old tale, and sighed softly. In this era, we need programming languages, not war stories, they whispered as they turned away. Rumors spread quickly. Last Horizon devoured maintenance funds, earning epithets like the harbor's budget assassin and floating junkyard that blocked tourists' sightlines. Each nickname cut away at the fresh paint Daniel had painstakingly applied, yet he offered no reply. In his faded blue eyes, their scorn was like salt on an already scarred steel hull. Painful, yet it also hardened the metal. For he understood. That boat, though aged, had once served as a steadfast shoulder amid a sea of fire. And he, though his hair was silver, remained the only helmsman who knew how to listen to an engine's roar blending with the rhythm of the waves. Day after day, Last Horizon continued to depart every weekend. The rough helm etched new grooves of time. Daniel felt his spirit erode like steel ground by salt water, yet he grew more resolute after each affront. Sometimes, in the small display compartment, he would trace the red midway line, listening to the wind slip through floorboards with a clattering like metal striking metal, and remind himself, the wheel of history never stops turning, as long as someone tightens the screws of memory. And so, the veteran never once considered mooring for good. On the contrary, each dawn he still opened the engine room door, letting the first rumble of the old engine sound like a sunrise greeting, powerful, hopeful, defiant of every rust-red prejudice striving to cloak the green hull. A thin mist cloaked the bay's back like a gray shawl drawn across the eye's horizon as Sunday began to clear its throat. Through that cold, humid breath, 6 figures staggered into view, carrying the smell of cheap beer and the clatter of empty cans rolling across the wooden pier. They had not come to fish, nor to admire the sunrise. Their sole target was the aged mahogany boat, lying motionless like an outdoor memorial. One of them gripped a spray can, shaking it with a rattling clatter, unleashing a cloud of paint that sprayed across the air, scrawling the word "scrap" in glaring red on the hull, right beside the golden bird that had once been the Navy's emblem of courage. Before the paint even had a chance to dry, a boot scuffed violently into the railing, the rotted wood splitting with a jagged crack so sharp it reverberated up the listener's spine, wrenching pain sharper than the sound of an old man's bones shattering when he stumbles. From the far end of the dock, Daniel heard the wood split, as though he felt his own chest tear apart. He bolted forward, his foot skidding on the wet plank, his knee smashing into the algae-streaked surface below. The pain shot up into his hip before he could even register it. The scent of salt mixed with old engine oil flooded his lungs, dragging a ragged cough from deep in his throat like a sputtering engine barely catching. Stifling a breath, Daniel flipped on his radio, his hand shaking more from fear than cold. The radio crackled and hissed. Then the Coast Guard's duty officer replied, voice dry as sandpaper. "Minor civilian damage. Handle it yourselves." Those 4 words snipped away his fragile hope, leaving a hollow echo in the veteran's chest deeper than an engine room plunged into darkness. The vandals heard the response and burst into coarse laughter, their harsh sounds ricocheting under the wooden awning, as though the authorities had stamped them with indifference. Dragging himself upright, Daniel crawled forward on numb knees until he reached the shattered railing. His weathered fingers curled around a splintered piece of wood, feeling the grain of once salty mahogany, now oozing black resin like congealed blood. His eyes swept over the spreading red paint, pausing at the final letter, still wet, and watched the fresh pigment run down a crack, dropping in heavy beads into the water. Each drop painted a ripple on the bay's surface, reminding Daniel of his former shipmates, those who had fallen from the deck into a sea of fire and never had their names lifted from classified records. The thought twisted his chest. Their memories, too, were being cast into the waves, as weightless as an empty beer can at the feet of those kids. An early breeze swept across the deck, carrying the clang of metal chains striking wooden posts, tinkling like an alarm horn in the bowels of a Tonkin Bay ship. Daniel shivered, not from the cold, but because the old steel inside him flexed in reflex. He thrust his calloused hand into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, heavy, and cold. His Bronze Star medal, its edge nicked. The worn bronze glinted in the mist, dusted by time but still holding the gravity that the discreet award ceremony had once imprinted on his heart. To the young vandals, that medal was nothing more than a shabby cosplay prop, a war accessory tossed in to spice up a forthcoming prank video. But to Daniel, it was like a map of his lifeblood. Each scratch marked an explosion. Each faded streak recalled a face buried by the waves. For over 40 years, he had held it close as though it beat in place of the 20 men who had trusted their lives to his every dare. He clutched the metal tightly, its sharp edge biting into his skin, a reminder to keep from breaking down. On deck, the vandals' rubber boots continued to stomp the planks, each thud echoing a bitter hostility. But to Daniel, that noise receded, giving way to the ocean's roar in his memory, the howl of a swirling wind, the heartbeats of his shipmates pounding beneath their life jackets, the dying engine striving to gasp one last surge of power to escape the blaze. All of it flooded back, mingling with the smell of fresh paint and the tang of old salt, swirling into a cocktail of memory both searing and sweet with resolve. A thin ray of sunlight pierced the low-hanging clouds, striking the metal's surface and casting a slender beam across the faded word valor. That hot bronze glow revealed Daniel's age on his weathered face, but it also etched upon him a fire not easily extinguished. With his other hand, he still gripped the broken railing, as if welcoming the splinters driving into his flesh to remind him that the boat was still alive, though torn apart. In his hoarse breath, he forced himself upright, not to challenge the youths now beginning to back away, but to remind himself, when the open sea chooses someone to bear witness, It will not abandon them in their hour of trial. That faint glint from the nicked metal was enough to make Daniel's heart beat in time again, enough to tell him that his mission was not over. At least, it would not end in silence and shame. That echo became the fuse that ignited memories. No further prompting was needed. June 1973 returned with the acrid smell of gunpowder that stung the tongue, the orange hue of flames reflecting on the black smoke tearing through Subic Bay's sky, and the piercing wail of alarm sirens like desperate storm signal birds. Daniel, then just 26, was on maintenance duty deep in the engine room, having just scribbled the last figure into the logbook, when the destroyer USS Kittredge shook as if punched by a colossal fist. The metallic tearing rang out sharply. The deck shifted to one side. Hot steam seared his bare arm through the burst pipe. Yet more terrifying was the moment a tremendous pressure wave ripped open the starboard hull, letting sea and flame surge in together. They say the first seconds of a disaster stretch on like eternity, and Daniel believed it. He remembered the fire line scorching across the deck. He remembered the secondary explosions in the ammunition compartment. He remembered the bodies of his shipmates flung like soulless mannequins. In that brief instant, the order to take action had not yet reached him. 20 sailors had already gone over the rail, sinking into the burning, viscous oil slick on the water's surface. The salt water, the thick, greasy oil, and the flames on the waves formed a hellish mixture, making cries for help sound as intermittent as bubbles bursting in a pan of boiling oil. No one told Daniel what to do. He just felt his legs carry him toward the ladder down to the rescue boat, his hands brushing away the life jackets hanging on their hooks to shed every pound of weight. The wooden rescue boat, small compared to the massive warship, lay nestled under the iron overhang, its engine long since silenced. Daniel leaped down, stomped the primer pedal hard, sending fuel surging into the combustion chamber like a frenzy, ignoring the engine's choking cough amid the rain of fire. The underwater propeller glowed red, nearing its melting point, yet the engine roared, driving the small wooden hull through the spreading flames like a stray bullet. The acrid smoke, the smell of burning hair, fresh blood, and blistering deck paint wove together, constricting his throat. Yet Daniel held the wheel firm, making the first circuit, edging closer to the rim of flame, allowing a burned sailor to cling to the gunwale. The second and third circuits followed, each pass picking up another oil-slicked body, sometimes accompanied by screams that tore apart into ragged gasps. In just those 3 swift rounds, the boat carried away 20 souls, a weight heavier than any cargo ever placed on its deck. When he turned back toward the Kittredge, its main deck mottled with blood and firefighting water, Daniel realized his hands were shaking so badly he could not grip the throttle. But his bones and joints only began to give way once the mission was complete. Until then, his body had functioned like a machine programmed by 2 words: never abandon. That night, the rescue ended with a brief report stamped "Top Secret" and sealed in a steel box. The medal ceremony took place quietly on the aft deck. No drums, no cameras. The brigade commander simply placed the bronze star in Daniel's hand, then squeezed his shoulder, nodding in lieu of thanks. There was no applause, only the dry hiss of sea wind tinged with oil and a whisper quieter than metal on metal. "Keep living. Say nothing of this." Now, in the deserted harbor, Daniel could clearly hear that phrase echoing deep in the left side of his chest, reminding him never to give up. Before him lay the streaked hull. At his ear the gentle lapping of waves, yet in his eyes burned the old Subic flame, urging his aged heart to beat faster. If 3 circuits through the burning oil had torn the sea, then 1 circuit of mocking spray paint could not be the end. He placed a hand on the wet scrap paint, feeling the tackiness of the pigment, as if accepting a challenge. Pressing his lips together, Daniel took a step back, not to yield, but to stand far enough to see the full extent of the boat's wound. He needed a long breath, to taste the cold salt in the air, so his anger could settle into steel. Then he would begin another series of actions, patient, persistent, as he had at 26, diving into a sea of fire without waiting for orders. For the sailors who had been pulled from death that day, and for the honor of the vessel etched into his very veins, Daniel understood. The flame of memory may cool for a time, but it never goes out. Exactly 60 minutes after the kick that shattered the railing, the water outside the bay's entrance trembled like a great drum struck deep beneath the surface. The silvery mist that had thickly blanketed the harbor parted to announce a low, resonant blast from a compressed horn, so dense and thunderous that the wooden pier shivered beneath everyone's feet. Before anyone could fully collect themselves, the bow of an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer emerged from the steam, its steel prow cleaving the bay's face into 2 broad arcs of white foam like the wings of a colossal bird. The massive gray hull then surged forward, its cold metal reflecting the first shafts of sunlight. A glittering streak stretching from bow to stern, like a welding torch's searing flare. Immediately behind that steel behemoth, 7 more warships simultaneously swung their bows into formation, lining up like an arrowhead, their hulls fanned out in precise symmetry, forming an honor guard that needed no band. Each ensign at the ship's sterns caught the morning breeze, the red and white stripes taut and brilliant, the white stars fluttering against the deep blue as though swearing an unbreakable oath. The cold gleam of steel from the destroyer's railing glanced off the fresh, red stain on Last Horizon's hull, where the word scrap still glowed wet, transforming those letters into a rust-like hue, trickling shameful rivulets into the water below. The vandals who had stamped their boots on that same hull now cast their heads down, eyes unwilling to follow the bright arc of steel. A pearl-white launch broke away from the formation, its sharp bow parting the waves gently yet decisively. At its stern, a neat V-shaped wake etched itself into the water like a silver blade. At the top of the pilothouse mast, the golden seagull clutching a blue anchor billowed proudly, an insignia reserved only for a launch carrying the admiral of the Atlantic Fleet. As the launch leaned in to press against the wooden pier, water struck its side with a firm rush of waves, an unmistakable signal that an unexpected ceremony was about to begin. The cabin door swung open. Matthew Green, his hair silver, his spine as straight as a ship's prow in a gale, stepped onto the planks. His black shoes struck the wooden deck with a crisp, precise clap. On his epaulets shone 4 silver stars against deep navy cloth, each star glinting through layers of time-worn smoke etched at the corners of his eyes. He paused half a heartbeat, his gaze sweeping the entire pier, then locked eyes on Daniel, standing beside the battered hull. The space between them was short, yet bridged by 50 years of oceanic memory. Instinctively, Daniel straightened his spine, the ache in his knee still throbbing, but his salute came without missing a beat. His hand, slightly trembling from age and emotion, rose to his temple in the old pattern, palm facing down, forearm canted 45 degrees. Simultaneously, Admiral Green lifted his steely arm, a salute as sharp as a bayonet's edge catching the sun. The 2 gestures met in midair, silent yet resonant like the toll of a bronze bell struck deep underwater, grave yet carrying far. As the Admiral's arm dropped, the loudspeaker hung on the launch crackled softly. Then his voice rang out, articulate and clear as a line of Morse code riding the wind. Captain Foster, on June 14th, 1973, you used this very vessel to save me and 19 sailors. Today, the Navy restores honor to Last Horizon and to you. In that instant, the wooden pier where the group of youths had stood fell into muted stillness. The ragged breathing, the scrape of shoes, the click and flash of cameras that had swarmed just moments before. Everything receded into silence. Only the sound of old oil seeping between the ship's timbers and the gentle lapping of waves against the mooring posts remained. Every gaze, curiosity, regret, awe, coalesced into an invisible halo around Daniel's figure, making his lean frame appear taller, even as the crisp autumn wind caught the frayed hem of his weathered uniform jacket. His eyes flickered with a glint. The warm salt water suddenly welled in the corner of his eye, yet Daniel pressed his lips together to keep each droplet from falling too quickly. The cold air, slipping through the gaps in the pier's planks, carried the lingering scent of old gasoline from Last Horizon's deck, mingled with the briny taste of bay salt. It blended with the warmth at the corner of his eye. 3 scents entwined, evoking the roar of a red-hot propeller tearing through flames years ago, a resonance only one who has stood amid a storm of steel and fire could truly hear. And there, in that small harbor, without flags parading or trumpets sounding, the victory hymn was composed from the raw elements of the sea itself. The steel breath of warships held in check, the roar of waves curling into the hull, the national ensigns snapping in the wind like the beat of a war drum, and the heartbeat of an old sailor at the exact moment his honor was reinstated, steady, unwavering, striking the final chord of a glory returned to its rightful mooring. At high noon the next day, when the South Carolina sun poured fire straight onto the bay, a colossal navy blue tarp was stretched from bow to stern of Last Horizon. The heavy fabric enveloped the aged hull as if it were a brand new lung chamber fitted to a patient emerging from critical condition. Beyond the outer ring of the pier lay stacks of Honduran mahogany still fragrant with resin, crates of copper nails gleaming red, coils of galvanized steel cable rolled like mussels awaiting installation. The Navy had dispatched its finest shipwrights, sleeves rolled high, silver anchor insignias on their biceps, each stride carrying the rhythm of a peacetime war factory. They toiled 10 hours a day. The wooden pier transformed into a makeshift workshop, the smell of epoxy resin, wood shavings, and primer mingling under the midday sun and salty breeze, creating a pungent yet hopeful new scent. Along the edge of the yard, a group of high school students in Horizon Guard t-shirts shared sandpaper, cans of primer, and large brushes, their clumsy hands guiding each wood grain, their lips counting the cadence of sanding. But their eyes lit up when Daniel raised his calloused finger to point. Rub in 5 circular motions. Don't disturb the grain. The kids nodded, laughter mingling with the rasp of sandpaper, blending with the rhythm of steel hammers driving copper nails. Occasionally, a nail struck wood and rang out like a small bell, a sure sign that this piece of Honduran timber was ready to reconnect with the vessel's past. Of course, the press arrived in force. Satellite vans trained their antennas skyward. Long-lensed cameras aimed at the tarp as though they wanted to strip bare this dramatic resurrection. But Daniel kept far from that glaring spotlight. He sat at the stern of the vessel, where the newly fitted mahogany frame still carried the scent of tropical forests. His hand traced the wood's grain, as if reading Braille recounting past feats. Only when a few members of the Horizon Guard team came by did he lower his head slightly, whispering to them about the last life ring he had cast through the inferno of Subic Bay. A ring that had once been the fragile boundary between 20 breaths and the abyss. His voice never rose for effect. It was steady, like the rhythm of waves. Yet the young eyes fixed on him did not waver, as though seeing the old flame reflected in the pristine new wood. And so the days passed amid the forceful, muffled hammering. The nights yielded to silence. When the Navy's security bell signaled 10 p.m., the shipwrights folded their rulers and the kids washed their brushes. The neon lights went dark. Daniel slipped back onto the deck, walking barefoot, afraid the soles of his shoes might scratch the newly polished planks, and laid his hand, still dusted with wood particles, on the helm layered in coats of varnish. The glossy paint caught the moonlight, reflecting against the faint scar on his cheekbone, more pronounced as he bent to whisper something only the old vessel could hear. In the night, Last Horizon did not respond with words, but the aft hull reverberated a deep sound like a heartbeat through its planks, clear, vigorous, a confirmation that both still shared a living pulse. 4 weeks passed as if polishing a mirror, each day removing a layer of dullness, each night adding a layer of luminous reflection. By the dusk of the 4th week, the large tarp was pulled down as though unveiling the final act on a Broadway stage. The entire hull gleamed in a pristine navy blue coat. The water reflected that deep blue like a swath of shimmering silk. Along each side of the hull, a slender red stripe ran just above the waterline, redrawing the vessel's horizon, and just beneath the deck's edge, the letters Last Horizon, newly gilded and polished, rose proudly, catching the crimson glow of the sunset, bursting at the horizon's edge. That afternoon, Admiral Green returned, clad in a flawless white dress uniform with shimmering ribbons. In his hand, he held a bronze plaque as large as a pocket Bible, engraved with the words, National Historic Landmark. The Navy shipwrights held the rivets firmly in place. Green lifted a wooden mallet, striking 3 decisive blows. The resonance echoed into the mahogany hull, traveled along the pier, jumped across to the steel mast of the warship anchored offshore, then split the salt-tinged sky. As the final rivet sank deep, every ship's horn offshore sounded in unison. The lingering blast merged with the rhythm of Daniel's heartbeat pounding in his ears. The row of red brick buildings lining the waterfront, silent for so many years, suddenly trembled. Windows rattled. The flag over the corner cafe snapped and fluttered, as though the entire town exhaled, gasped, then inhaled in collective pride, now finding its mooring. Daniel stood midships, his back slightly bent with age, yet his expression lit with a brightness unlike the day he first emerged beneath that paint-speckled tarp. His hands, once trembling from the salty wind pressing at his elbows, remained at rest, allowing the vessel and the sea to share the final light of day. In that moment, every media lens was trained on the deck, yet the most beautiful shot lay outside the frame. It lay in the sensation in each viewer's chest, trembling to the fleet's horns, a deep, sustained note that any American heart that had ever known the word sacrifice would hear as its own anthem. And Last Horizon, the boat once tattered, once called a pile of splintered wood, now stood tall in the bay, its gilded name shining high like old life restored to luminous strength, ready to tell once more the stories of people, sea, and the America that would never bow. Autumn laid a red carpet across the grounds of the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis. The ancient stone steps glowed brilliantly beneath a velvet layer of maple leaves, and it was on that sunlit, sunset-drenched afternoon that Daniel Foster appeared on the steps leading into the great hall. He wore a simple dark navy blazer, his back held straight by the ebony cane that had accompanied him throughout the restoration of the old vessel. His gait was slow, yet on that brow weathered by sea winds shone the same resolve with which he once steered a boat into fire. The warm, golden hallway lights cast a soft glow upon the polished bronze star on his left chest. With each step, it seemed as though a sliver of sunlight followed him into the solemn hall. Inside, 4,000 midshipmen sat in rows of oak-colored seats, their crisp white uniforms pressed to perfection, their blue-striped collars forming straight lines. As Daniel leaned on his cane and made his way to the central wooden podium, the tap of his shoes on the gleaming floor sounded faintly, mingling with the rustle of uniform fabric as the young audience drew a collective breath, holding the room in absolute stillness. The overhead lights reflected off the bronze star, sending a pinpoint gleam tracing each movement of his hand, an invisible compass guiding every gaze to the lone figure on stage, not obscured by shadow, an old veteran bearing within him the breath of ancient storms. Daniel paused, lowered the microphone to just below his lips, and swept his eyes across the hall. He needed no notes. Memories were etched into his bones. In a voice deep and husky, tinged with the grit of thousands of hours shouting orders across salt-laden wind, he spoke clearly and firmly. When you save a life amid the storm, you think only of the next breath. But to keep the flame of memory alive for a generation, you must breathe into it for the rest of your days. Not a sound dared interrupt, for the wooden seats had become a resonant chamber, lifting each word to soar along the vaulted ceiling, touching the bas-relief of the sailor hoisting sails at the far end of the auditorium. The young faces before him fell silent for a heartbeat, as though that sentence, so heavy with the weight of years, had never before been tasted. In the next moment, nearly 4,000 backs rose in unison. The crisp rustle of uniforms and the steady rhythm of shoes on stone formed a single echo, indistinguishable from waves lapping against steel hulls. Row upon row of right arms lifted to the brim of their covers in a standard salute. The gesture bisected the air diagonally, a silent pledge reaffirming their respect for the memory of those who came before and their own commitment to carry that legacy's flame. Daniel inclined his head in return. The light then shimmered on his metal like a star falling to his chest, anchoring every emotion into a solemn tableau requiring no brass instruments or cannon fire. The ceremony concluded swiftly. Daniel declined the escort, requesting instead the path along the Severn River back to the pier. The young crescent moon, not yet full, cast a thin silver veil over the rippling water, tracing a path of light along the wooden walkway leading to Last Horizon, quietly moored. From afar, the newly painted navy blue hull still caught the moonlight, sometimes soft as a mountain silhouette, sometimes bright as a shard of shattered glass each time a gentle ripple passed. Daniel laid his cane on the planks and stepped onto the familiar deck. The first touch of wood beneath his feet brought the cool night air of the sea rushing in like an old, soft blanket. Without turning on the lights, he felt his way to the pilot house, where the mahogany wheel, resplendent with fresh varnish, reflected his scarred features. Standing there, his hand curved lightly over the rim, his thumb tracing the smooth grain, he felt the warmth of the wood beneath his palm, and heard the ship's hull reverberate with a steady heartbeat of waves pounding the timbers, each pulse echoing faithfully. The moon slipped over the brim of his glasses, bridging the crease between his brows to reveal a rare serenity in his expression. Daniel nodded faintly, a silent thank you to that unfeeling timber for imparting one final lesson. True worth never decays beneath the rust of time. It only lies dormant, awaiting someone patient enough to wipe away the dust, buff it to a shine, and carry its unfinished souls forward. He exhaled, yet this breath was not burdened like the morning he had been shamed. Rather, it was as soft as the wind whispering through the red maples before the hall. Outside, the moon glided over the Severn's surface, the water's pulse slow and steady, a lullaby concluding a cycle of struggle and opening a new chapter where memory passes into young hands. Daniel pressed lightly on the helm, stepped back to savor the gleam of the gilded name Last Horizon beneath the silver moonlight. Then he smiled, ever so gently, like the final star in a full sky. If the story of an old vessel and the flame of memory has touched your deepest self, take a moment to subscribe to Veteran Best Stories, ring the bell, and share with those who still believe that gratitude can light harbors across America, where countless old boats and countless old tales wait silently for a gentle knock, a removal of time's dust, so that memory may once again illuminate the waters of home.